So CPA Dr. David Muturi, FKIM, is a seasoned leadership, governance, and management consultant with more than 20 years of experience in executive leadership, academia, and organizational development. He's a former CEO of the Kenya Institute of Management, KIM, and Dean at KCA University. He specializes in corporate governance, strategic management, organizational culture, employee engagement, and leadership development. He is a respected speaker, a consultant, and thought leader who has guided numerous organizations in enhancing performance and sustaining governance structures. With a round of applause, let's welcome CPA Dr. David Muturi. Let's appreciate Dr. as he makes his way to the stage to take us through the first session. Are we ready on the screens? Okay, thank you. Karibu sana Daktari.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, leaders. It is a pleasure to be here once again. I've had the honor to facilitate in previous conferences, and therefore I feel very privileged to share with you this morning. Time is really gone. I think I was supposed to start at 9:30, but as you can see now, it is 10:34. So we can agree, we can squeeze the 1 hour to about 40 minutes, so that we do not stretch the program a little bit too much. I've been asked to speak about the culture, organizational culture, the role that it has in terms of impact and innovation and impact, in terms of making the SACCOs a one-stop shop. Now, before we even go to the organizational culture, having worked with yourselves and other SACCOs, I know that your priorities, or let me say our priorities, if you are to look at our strategic plans, even if you are to bring all our strategic plans here, they will have 1, 2, 3, 4 things of the items here. We are focusing on the digital transformation and shared services. We are focusing on the expanding market reach. We are focusing on diversifying products and services. Youth inclusion is quite a priority. SME financing and wealth diversification, strengthening trust, governance, and brand identity, managing costs and improving efficiency, financial education and risk management, member retention, and continuous engagement. Does that sound like your SACCO? Does that sound like your SACCO? If your priorities are elsewhere, maybe anybody whose SACCO's priorities are elsewhere? I believe that our priorities, even if we change the wording a little bit, our priorities are around this area. This is what you're focusing on. And this is what any progressive SACCO is focusing on. So talking about the strategy, talking about the direction in the next couple of years, these are our area of top priority. So if we agree then that those are our areas of top priority, we may want to ask ourselves, what might make it not possible to realize those priorities from a people point of view? The reasons why these challenges might not be realized, those priorities might not be realized, one of them, in as far as our people is concerned, is psychological safety in our organizations, in our SACCOs. Lack of psychological safety, where people speak in whispers. That is, if in your SACCO, people speak in whispers, they are not ready to speak up because of fear, because of insecurity. That is a serious challenge, is a serious inhibitor of achieving the priorities that you have just stated. The other one is communication, poor communication. When communication does not flow freely, it is not accurate, it is not transparent, it is not truthful, that becomes a limitation in as far as attaining our priorities are concerned. Transparency, lack of transparency, nepotism. You know, nepotism, if we do things based on other considerations rather than merit, that becomes a challenge in as far as realizing our priorities is concerned. Then performance management, measuring of performance. And when you talk about measuring of performance, the employees, are we able to evaluate each employee objectively? Even the board, do we evaluate ourselves? Because if you don't evaluate ourselves, then it removes the moral authority from ourselves evaluating others. If you're not evaluating yourself, you have no moral authority evaluating other people. Then micromanagement and interference. Not sticking to your lane. Everybody sticking to their lane. The management to their lane, the board to their lane, the members to their lane, everybody sticking to their lane, not micromanaging each other. Then power distance. And what I mean by power distance here, it is the distance between the board and the management. Because sometimes that distance can be too huge. That is, the board are high up there, whereas the management is seen as, low there. So when you have too huge a power distance, then that becomes a challenge. And then resistance to change. And resistance to change, when people talk about resistance to change, they think of other people. You could be the biggest resistor to change. You want to do things in the same way that they have always been done. And then finally, poor governance. Now, all these put together becomes the way of doing things. Whether it is the negative or the positive side of it, the way of doing things. It becomes the culture, our way of doing things. So what then is organizational culture, and why is it important? Organizational culture, like I've said, is the way of doing things, the values, the beliefs, the attitudes that you have within an organization. And it has been confirmed by research that culture destroys strategy. Culture, it is said, eats strategy for breakfast. Because strategy is the glad plan, and you spend a lot of money preparing the strategy. And you say, these are our priorities, and this is how we are going to achieve those priorities. But then you have to align that strategy with the culture, the way of doing things. Because when strategy and culture are not aligned, then strategy becomes an intention. It is what you intended to do. But the culture is what will actually happen. So when you don't align the strategy with the culture, with the way of doing things, then what will happen is that at the end of the 5 year, you look back at the strategy and it just remains an intention. It is what you intended to do. But culture is what you'll actually do. Why? Because strategy is executed by people. And when people are executing the strategy, they do things in the way that they know, in the way that they believe, in the way that they have always done it, unless a deliberate effort is made to align the strategy to the culture. The people that you have, we can look at them, or we can think of them in 4 quadrants, 4 types of people, based on their emotional and their intellectual commitment. Because for an organization to be successful, for a strategy to be fully implemented successfully, you have to have the emotional and the intellectual commitment of the people that you're working with. And as we say, When a fish rots, it starts from where? When a fish rots, it starts from the head. So it starts with us. In terms of our commitment, in terms of intellectual commitment and emotional commitment. Now, on the upper quadrant, or rather, it is based that we have emotional intelligence, a commitment at the bottom, and then vertically we have the intellectual commitment. When you have people who have low intellectual commitment and no emotional commitment, we call them the weak links. They have low emotional commitment, they have low intellectual commitment. Weak links. When you have people who are emotionally committed, but they are not intellectually committed, we call them loose cannons. And they are very dangerous. And there are very many in the Sacco movement. Somebody is committed, emotionally committed, but does not take time to educate himself or herself so that he can have the kind of intellectual commitment that is needed. So that person becomes very dangerous because they do things that ought not to be done in spite of their emotional commitment to the Sacco. When you have people who are intellectually committed, they know, but they have no emotional commitment, they become bystanders. They are just there, they are bystanders. They have no emotional commitment. So the ideal, the champions, are people who are both intellectually and emotionally committed. And that is how you create a positive organizational culture. So the organizational culture, therefore, then, it is the values, the beliefs, the attitudes, and the behaviors. And they work together to make an organization work. The way you do your things. The Sacco organizational culture. That is, how do you relate? What do you believe? Why did you vie to be a board member? Why are you a board member? That's the beginning of the organizational culture, because why you vied is what you take into the organization. So if you vied for your personal benefit, then you take your personal benefit into the board, and that becomes an organizational culture, that everybody is there to benefit themselves. The values, the beliefs, the attitude. And that is what will separate a successful an organization from an unsuccessful organization. So how do you know then that you have a strong organizational culture? One is authentic leadership, true leadership, authentic leadership. Authentic leadership, that you are there with a vision and a mission and a purpose. And it can be seen and felt. The staff members can tell a board member who is authentic from a board member who is not authentic. By the way you speak, the way you do, the demands that you make, and then they take up from there. Because I'll repeat again, when a fish rots, it starts from the head. The behavior that you see in your organization is a reflection of yourself. That is the way that you are. So authentic leadership. Then clear values, core values. We usually are very good at putting the values in our strategy and displaying them. But living those values is an entirely different story. And I would like to ask you, in your house, have you put the values, have you displayed the values of your family? Have you displayed the values of your family? But they are inbuilt. It is known. Your children or the people that you live with, they know your values because you live them. And that's why even there will be difference in one family with another. There is a family where children coming in at midnight is not a problem. It is okay. That is their way of doing things. In another home, it is known that if your high school, college below, You cannot come in beyond this hour. That's the culture. And that is the same culture we are saying is replicated in an organization. In some organization, it is okay to come late. It is okay to do A, B, C, D. In some other organization, it will not be okay. And therefore, it does not matter how good your strategy is if it is not backed up by the way that you do things. It is not backed by the organizational culture, the values. Number three, employee empowerment. Empowering employee. Letting them make decisions, letting them exercise their professional responsibility without interference. We do agree that we are teachers. I'm a teacher myself. I trained as a teacher, and I taught for a couple of years. But the fact that I am a teacher, then I become a board member, I have certain limitations that I may not be. I'm not an accountant, for example. You're not an accountant. You're not a human resource manager. You're not a credit analyst. So there is a level to which you allow the professionals to do their job. But if the employees are not empowered and they have to keep on looking over their back, that is a sign of a weak organizational culture, and that organization will not attain the strategy that it has put in place. And then open communication, where there is no suspicion, and I've spoken about psychological safety. Psychological safety is where people feel free to ask questions. They are free to learn. They are not terrified by mistakes, so long as they are genuine mistakes, because they know they are going to be corrected and taught how to do things better. But where there is lack of psychological safety brought about by lack of open communication, that is an indication of a poor organizational culture. And then an organization that prioritizes well-being and recognizes performance. Recognition, recognizing performance, recognizing people who are excelling. That is the way that you have a strong organizational culture. Why is it important? We are talking about innovation and impact. Innovation and impact. And one of the things about innovation is that you got to have people who make independent decisions, independent professional decisions. So when you have a positive organizational culture, a strong organizational culture, you get the employees and even the board members making independent decisions because they are not under any kind of undue pressure. Independent decision making. Number two, encourages innovation and risk-taking. When you have a strong organizational culture, people make suggestions. You take risks, calculated risks. But when you are ultra-conservative, and our chief guest has spoken about ultra-conservatism, that means that you're not going to be able to innovate because you do not want to take risks. But when you have a positive organizational culture, then you get people innovating and taking calculated risks. And then a good organizational culture drives cross-functional execution. When you have mistrust, when you lack psychological safety, people go into silos. Silos. We have this department into a silo, this department into a silo. Even the board becomes a silo. So they are siloed. You have siloed. So there is no that cross-functional working together. And when you don't have that working together, there is no way you can be able to innovate and stay ahead in as far as the competition is concerned. And then it improves adaptability. Adaptability. We spoke about the priorities. We spoke about digitization. We spoke about bringing in the youth. We spoke about all those priorities that you have in your strategic plans. A good organizational culture promotes adaptability. People are agile. People are willing to listen to a different way of doing things. Challenge will be if you're the greatest resistor of change. That is, when you hear about something that can be done in a different way, then you become the biggest source of resistance. What you do is promoting a culture of fear, a culture of conservatism, which cannot bring about the impact or the innovation that you desire. So how then can you achieve this kind of an organizational culture? I said the organizational culture is as important as a strategy. You get the strategy, excellent. Then after the strategy, you work on the organizational culture. And to do that, we follow about 10 steps. About 10 steps that will enable you to create the desired organizational culture. And step number 1 is to audit the current organizational culture. Asking yourself a couple of questions about the culture that you have. And we are talking about the basics to the complex. Do you keep time? Yes. How is your customer experience? How do people relate with each other? Do we have trust? Do we have interference? You audit the current culture so that you can have a baseline where you are as far as your culture is concerned. I have worked with several organizations on organizational culture. And some of the organizations even surprise themselves when they do the audit. The board becomes surprised, the chairman becomes surprised, because you didn't know that some of the things that happen. So you could be living in a fool's paradise. Some of the things that happen in your Sacco that you do not know that they happen. And they are the ones that inhibit progress. So it is important to do an audit of the current culture, to know what are the things that are happening within the organization. How do we do our things? Then step number 2, you review and align the organizational strategy on the 7 elements. And the 7 elements here is the strategy, the structure, the systems, the shared values, the style, the staff, and the skills. When these 7 items are not aligned, and you may surprise yourself that they are not aligned in your organization because some of them could have outlived their usefulness, or they could have been, they have not been aligned over time. That is, you may be having very good strategy, but the strategy is not aligned to the structure. So you have a good strategy, current strategy, but the structure, you're still talking about clerks. You're still talking about even the nomenclature, how you title the officers you work with. It is also part of their mindset. Because when you're called a clerk, most likely you'll also act like a what? Like a clerk. It is part of that's the structure that you're talking about. And then the systems. That is, how do you do? How do you organize the work? So you review that to see whether it is aligned to the strategy and to the culture. And then you review the current values. Most of the organizations hardly take time to talk about the organizational values. Once they are on the strategy, and the strategy is approved by the board, that usually becomes the end of it. There are no conversations about the values of our organization. So it helps to review those values and clarify the values to the employees. And then review the brand of the people. You know, when you talk about the brand of the people, the kind of a people that you'd like to be. If, for example, I asked you, describe in one sentence the kind of people that you have. Or let me rephrase it. If you're asked in one sentence to describe the traffic department of the Kenya Police, what will be the one sentence that you'll give? It is not even a sentence. It is a word. It is not even a sentence. I thought it would be a sentence. You might say maybe corrupt with a few exceptions. So you may want to ask yourself, how can your people, how can your employees be described by the customers? What is the one description that they will give? And that description and that culture is even that determines even in attracting talent and retaining talent. Because there are some organizations, even if you're doing an interview, and somebody came for the interview and said he or she is coming from a certain organization, they may have the qualification, but you may not be very willing to take up the person because of what is known about that organization. How is your organization? The brand. How are your people, including yourself, the brand? When you say you're from a certain Sacco, what would be the one sentence that you would have? That is the brand that you're talking about, reviewing it and stating the way that you would want it to be. Then the HR vision, and that is related to the brand. That is, as a HR, your human resource, what kind of people do you want to develop and grow? What kind of people do you want to develop and grow? Because that would form even the basis of the induction. When somebody comes in, the way they are inducted, taken through the process, even up to the time that they are retiring. The vision, the kind of people that we had. If you heard of the Kenya Defense Forces, the Kenya Army, what kind of a person comes to your mind? The person who comes to your mind is a disciplined, fit person, isn't it? When you talk about the Kenya Defense Forces, when you talk about the Kenya Army, so what comes to your mind is a disciplined, fit person who is professional, which cannot be said if you spoke about Nairobi City Council, not even county, Nairobi City Council. This is Nairobi City Council. What kind of people, if somebody says from Nairobi City Council, what comes to your mind? Harassing hawkers and beating up people, there's what comes to your mind. That's what you're talking about, the HRV, being very clear and deliberate about it. And then review the customer service charter. The service charter, I'm sure, if I asked, do you have a customer service charter? Everyone here would say, yes, you have a customer service charter. But there's a question of, do you measure the implementation of the service charter? Do you measure? Do you measure the implementation of the service charter to know that actually what you have promised, you live by that promise? Or you say a loan is processed within 24 hours, but 2 weeks down the line, the loan is still not processed. So reviewing the customer service charter. And then number 7, we hold leaders engagement. Holding regular leaders engagement so that you can be able to agree on the kind of an organization you want to be known as. And you'll not be known as an organization by strategy. It is what you actually do. Because we said strategy is a plan. But the culture is what you actually do. So the description that we know of you is based on how your people interact with the customer. And even how your people interact with each other. So it is very important for the leaders to be clear about the kind of a culture they want to propagate in the organization. And that can only be if they lead by example. They agree that this is the way that I'm going to carry myself, this is the way that I'm going to do things in this organization. And then number 8 is to involve now the management and the supervisors. Having agreed on the kind of culture that you want to be known, the values that you want to be known for. Because you may not have you cannot be everything to everybody all the time. But you'll find there are some organizations that tend to move a lot faster. Even here, there are some organizations there are some SACCOs that have tended to grow a little bit faster than others. If you went to those organizations, you'll find a couple of ways of doing things that is shared by everybody. And that is what is driving growth. But if you have never taken time as the leaders to reflect on the culture that you have, the way of doing things, then it means that you may be coming up with very nice strategies, but then when it's come to the execution, it is being executed in the way it has always been. And therefore, at the end of it, it just remains a plan. So for you then to be able to shape, as I come to an end, to shape an appropriate culture, you must as a leader then be able to change people's minds. And changing people's mind, there are three categories of tools that have been known to change the way people do things. The first one is what we call the inspiration or the leadership tools. Then we have number 2, what we call the management tools or information. And then the last one is what we call the power tools or the intimidation. Power tools, intimidation. Now, that is the lowest level, and that is why it is even at the lower bottom. Because intimidation will only work for a short while. That's why I said psychological safety. Do people in the organization speak in whispers? Are they forthright? Or they say there are people who are listening to go and tell others? And are there those others that they are listening to go and tell the board or to go and tell the CEO? Because of intimidation, power tools. A positive organizational culture is where leaders use the leadership tools, the inspiration tools, and there are 5. And one of them is visioning. Having a vision. A leader with a vision. It creates a positive culture. What do you see for your organization? In all the circles that I have interacted with, there is always that one never to forget board member that you talk about. You talk about that never to forget. That member was a source of inspiration. He used to tell us A, B, C, D. He would see this organization going vision. You have a vision. A vision as an individual, a vision for the organization. What you see into the future. For example, leave alone the one that is in the strategy. If you're to be asked, what do you see? What vision do you have for your Sacco? Or it is just, Then, the other one is persuasion. Being able to persuade. And the persuasion here that you're talking about is the appeal to the affective domain. We are teachers. Teachers, you say a person has 3 domains, the cognitive domain, the psychomotor, the affective, to the heart, when you appeal to the heart. And that's why, remember we have said there are 2 types of commitment. There is the intellectual commitment and the emotional commitment. So when you have intellectual commitment, but you don't have the emotional commitment, you become a bystander. For example, even if it's a CEO, you have the intellectual commitment because you have the qualifications and you have the job, but you don't have the emotional commitment, you're a bystander. You could be a bystander in your organization. So when you appeal to the affective, the persuasion, purpose. You talk about the purpose, why you exist, and why you do the things that you do as a Sacco. Persuasion. And then there is a role modeling. Role modeling. Leading by example. You lead by example. And we watch and we see. Because you are our leader, you are a role model. So the demands that you make, the things that you do, shapes the culture. If you tell me to let that loan pass as a manager, even when it has not met the requisite, I'll also pass once for my friends. And then everybody would say there, if you know somebody, your loan would pass. It becomes a way of doing things. You have created the culture. So role model. And then we have storytelling. Very important, very important. You have to tell stories about your organization. Stories about your organization, both good and bad, to learn from. Storytelling. You must have a story. If you don't have a story that you tell about your organization, then you're not providing leadership. You have to have stories, many stories to tell about the organization. Storytelling has proven to be one of the most powerful way of changing people's mind. And I said the stories can be good, the stories can be bad. I went to to a certain Sacco, and I was told about a story, and you're talking about storytelling. And one of the stories that you're told is that there used to be a customer who was selling salt for cows, for livestock. And that time, he used to sell a kilo at about 20 shillings, the coins. So at around a few minutes to 3 o'clock, he would come with, with a lot of coins. So I was told the story. I was told that one of the cashiers said, when he was coming in one of the days, he said, "Huyu yule mzee wa macoins." Na huyo mzee wa macoins alisikia, and he was very disappointed. And actually, after a short while, he actually closed the account and went to another financial institution. But after a couple of years, like 10 years, I'm told that mzee wa macoins now operate a very huge factory with over 20 trucks distributing the product. So we would say then, what is the essence of the story? Customer experience. That mzee left that institution. If he was still in that institution, he would be one of the most important customers. So that story is shared. So when it is shared, it may look a very simple story, but it changes people's mind. Because when you're a cashier, you are very careful about treating customers well, because you never know where that customer will be going to. Those are the stories that you're talking about. You encourage those kind of storytelling, good, bad, because they are more than telling somebody, nitakupeleka kwa HR, ama tutakufuta kazi. Wewe vile tutakuona, tutakufuta kazi. You tell stories that are appropriate to the occasion. And then conversations, holding conversations, encouraging conversations. Conversation, not when you're talking down to people, but when you're having a conversation, an exchange, and a polite exchange of information, having a conversation. Because it is during conversation that you can get some very critical information. It is during conversation you can get to know how people think and why they think that way. And then you can be able to persuade them otherwise. So what are we saying? Because I wish to finish. You may have a very good strategy. But if the strategy is not aligned to the culture, it will just remain an intention. Because people will do things in the same way that they have always done, rather than being aligned to the culture. So when you have formulated your strategy, question your culture, whether that culture is supportive to the strategy. And then we have said the 5 tools of changing people's mind. You must be a role model. You must persuade people by giving them the purpose, why we do things in the way that we do. If, for example, when you tell a cashier the reason why we insist, or a manager, the reason why we insist that you come in time, punctual, is because there will be that one teacher who will have asked for permission from his principal or her principal to pass by the Sacco so that he can transact and then go and teach. So when you come late, it means that you inconvenience him, might not even get permission another time. So I'm not asking you to come in time to praise me. I'm asking, conversations and persuasion, so that the culture then can be aligned to the strategy. But in the absence of that alignment, the strategy will remain an intention. That is why some SACCOs will grow faster than others, That is why some will look attractive than others. And the strategy might even be formulated by the help of the same consultant. But one is executed aligned to the culture, the other one is not executed, not aligned to the culture. And that makes the whole difference. So if you are to innovate, if you are to impact, the culture must be aligned. It must be right. Thank you very much. It is quoted.
Thank you so much, Daktari. Let's appreciate Daktari.